We're going to talk a little bit about the physiographic regions of the North American realm. And if you look at your map on page 38, or you can look at the PowerPoint, you'll notice some different sectors here. We have the interior lowlands, which is a lot of the farming belt. Then we have the Great Plains. I can't see it from here. I'm looking at my book. The Great Plains. We have various mountain ranges that go for the Pacific Mountains, go from actually Southern California all the way up to Alaska and into Canada. Of course, we have the Rockies as well, which are mainly American, but they also go up into Canada a little bit. So the Rocky Mountains here. One thing unfamiliar is the Canadian Shield. What is the Canadian Shield? And I'm going to get a picture of it, look at it a little better. We'll look over here. The Canadian Shield is primarily a Canadian entity, a physiographic region. If what it was in the Pleistocene, or the last ice age, pushed a lot of soil. The ice just pushed a lot of till, a lot of soil, all the way down into the upper Midwest a little bit. You can see that crossing over here, but it's mainly in Canada, and kind of just pushed all this stuff down. And it's just think of the last ice age. It's nothing but glacier, and that's what the Canadian Shield is. You'll notice too. I'm going to go for the. Let me go over here. Let me look at the Great Lakes for a second. Here's something a lot of people don't know about the Great Lakes. They all drain. All 5 Great Lakes drain into the St. Lawrence River, St. Lawrence Seaway, and then into the Atlantic Ocean. There's a series of levees and docks. There we go. That allow shipping from to carry heavy cargo shipping all the way into the Midwest to Chicago and all points in the Midwest from the coast, which is kind of cool. I didn't know that. So that's a really cool thing to see. Excuse me. And so we go from, we also look at this cross section, and you can't see it. Just look at your book. It's a cross section of elevation across the United States at 40 degrees latitude. Where's 40 degrees latitude? Well, it's right, I have to look at the book, right where you see the words Pacific Ocean, 40 degrees latitude. It goes all the way across the United States into the Appalachians, which actually go from North Georgia to Maine. If you've ever walked the Appalachian Trail, I've walked part of it. I don't recommend it because it's scary as anything at night. You ever camp out in the middle of nowhere and hear all kinds of stuff? It's not for the faint of heart. Although it is a lot of fun. Of course, we have the Piedmont, which is above us, and we have the Great Coastal Plain, or the Great Gulf Atlantic Coastal Plain, which we at Myrtle Beach occupy. That means Florida, South Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Texas, part of Arkansas. And but what I just wanted you to get kind of an idea. Of course, the Great Plains, and under the Great Plains we have giant aquifers. This is not in the book. One of the aquifers is called the Ogallala, named after the Oglala Sioux Native American tribe, and it feeds basically water to the Midwest and the Western farms that run this aquifer that's being slowly drained over decades of massive farm use. And that's how we were able to be the great breadbasket of the world and grow all this cool stuff, because of the Ogallala aquifer. Anyway, so I want you to look at this cross section of the map, and you'll notice the further west you go, the higher things are. So you start out in the east, things are relatively low. And I'm looking at my book because I can't see it too well in the PowerPoint. But we start out pretty much to 3,000 feet, and then we kind of in the east, the Appalachians, then it dips down to 2,000, and then 1,500. Then it starts climbing as we get west. So it goes up to 1,000, then 500, and on and on and on. And the highest point is roughly, if I asked you a question and looking at that map, I might say, what is the highest point that you see at 40 degrees latitude in the United States? And that would be the 10,000 feet right here, the 10,000 feet mark. So you could say roughly the highest point in the map comes at 10,000 feet? That'd be a good question to know. So I'd like you to really remember that. All right, I'm going to stop this for a second and go on. I'm not going to really get into the climates. We all know what the climate is in the southeast: hot, humid. We know what it is up north, cold as anything. And we really are familiar with the weather in our own North American realm. Practically anything up in Canada, it does get cold and it snows. So there is one thing I'd like you to know, though, about rain shadow. Remember I talked about rain shadow? What is rain shadow? Is when the cold air rises, and as it rises, it condenses. It squeezes out the moisture on one side of the mountain, and then it falls over the other side of the mountain, and it comes down as the air falls. It warms up and becomes kind of a hot, dry wind. So there's basins over here. First, cold moisture, like Washington State or say Oregon, rainy. That's why it's all rainy. Those Pacific Mountains range. And then after the clouds get over that, they fall down and you have hot, dry air. So that's all we're going to talk about on weather. Remember, I did talk about a little bit in the Canadian film, one of the first or second films, about First Nations, that's Native Americans, and how they were allowed to hold titles to large tracts of land in the northern sections of British Columbia. Well, unlike our Native Americans, they don't have titles to large tracts of land. They're stuck on the reservations. So the Canadian Native Americans, or First Nations people, did rather well, and that's part of your assignment. Find me a First Nation tribe that you like in Canada and write about it. I think I posted that. So anyway, we'll move on. Page 41 of your book, we have a map of the various religions in Canada and the U.S., and we see there's a lot of Christian, then we have Anglican, Baptist, Lutheran, on and on, Roman Catholic, Pentecostal, and no majority religion. So a lot of it is Christian-based denominations and such. And this is interesting up here in the First Nation territories. It's Anglican Church, and is very prominent up there. Just a quick mention of some of the religious aspects of this country and Canada. We've already covered this: 10 provinces, 3 territories in Canada. We've seen some of the examples of the Canadian provinces and territories, and of course the 50 states, and I'm not going to dwell on that. If you don't know it by now, well, let's not worry about it. Other than to say that both are federal or federation governmental types. We're a federal government, so is Canada, where a central government is quasi-controlling the areas of the states. Remember, like the United States, each state has its own form of government and is, in effect, on a day-to-day basis, runs its own affairs. That's the same thing with the provinces in Canada. We've already talked about that. Anyway, just thought I'd mention it, and we'll move on. Again, remember the Canadian tar sands project? We talked about the first of the films. Well, here's our map on page 43 of your book, showing you zinc, lead, nickel, silver, uranium, copper, bauxite, asbestos, phosphate, potash, salt, sulfur, etc. Of course, coal, oil, and gas. Alrighty, so here's a good trivia question. Of the fossil fuels, of the energy in the North American realm, what is the most predominant energy form of fossil fuels we have? Well, look at your map. It is coal, obviously. Coal is king, or was, and awful as it is, we have so much of it, and that's kind of a shame that we do. But we're up to the gills in coal. Of course, oil and gas are in there, and with fracking, that'd be a good thing to talk about fracking. I guess the book really doesn't get much into it, but fracking is where they force water underground to get to the natural gas, to push out the natural gas. In fact, I own a little bit. I'm part owner of an unproductive well where they do fracking out in Oklahoma. Haven't got $1 from it, probably never will. Now we get into the economy, and I want to show you a different map from your book. On page 45 of your book, it kind of gives you a early industrial concentration and continuing urban expansion and new high-tech regions. We have high-tech regions, and we also have manufacturing regions, but I wanted to show you a different map of the American manufacturing belt. Now, we have 3 types of economies, and this you should have had in Introduction to Geography. If this is your first class in geography, I'll just tell you the primary economy is extracting raw materials like mining, and from there, or logging, or something that you get from the earth. And then the secondary sector of the economy is making those raw materials, say lumber, into like trees into lumber to build houses. So so you're taking something you've extracted, like coal, or let's think more fun. Let's think diamonds or something, making those diamonds into for consumers or for industrial diamonds, like diamond saws. Taking something you've taken from the earth, turning it into something that can be used as a product. So again, kaolin, which Georgia and I think South Carolina has, is mined up in southern Georgia and southern also it bleeds over into South Carolina. It makes pottery, or kaolin's used for a lot of more or less pottery stuff, for dishes and things. It's very useful. So you're turning it into a finished product after you've mined it. Now the tertiary sector, the third, is a higher sector. That's where you get IT or services to support production and consumption. So that would be computers, cars, something's finished. You're supporting the consumer. It's more of a service industry. So, but we're going to look at this map, which I think is cool. It's a lot better than what your book has. Let me get that map. Where is it? Here we are. Okay, here's your American manufacturing belt. It kind of gives you where all the manufacturing, notice it's all around near the lakes. See that? And so, and it kind of bypasses West Virginia, so it's all the Northeast and going into the Midwest and Ohio. Again, because your Great Lakes, remember, your Great Lakes through locks and various levees all drain into here, then they drain out and they go through the St. Lawrence River, the St. Lawrence Seaway, and then go out into the ocean. So that's a big help to manufacturing. That's why you have it in Indiana and Ohio and Michigan, Wisconsin, and places like that. So anyhow, Illinois, of course. So that's kind of what your book doesn't show you. I like this map far better. So if I said something about where's the American, give me a state that the American manufacturing belt goes through, you could say Pennsylvania, New York, something like that. Very easy question. Of course, the biggest part, or some of the biggest parts of the economy, is transportation, and I couldn't let this go without you seeing the massive amounts of rail that we have in this country. You probably know it's there, but have you ever been on a train? Most likely you haven't. Have you ever seen a giant rail yard? I come from Atlanta. Atlanta, this is my home, basically, and this is my backyard, figuratively speaking. This huge rail depot. It's always been a big rail depot, but Chicago, Atlanta, and you'll see that what we have in the book on page 46 of your book, you see, let me go back. Wait a minute, come back here. All righty, let me go here. I'll find it in a minute. Hold on. Where did you go? Oh, here we are. Okay, there we go. All right, you'll see the massive amounts of rail that we have in this country. And we could not have an economy like we have without this rail. Railroad is king in this country, and it still is, even though you more than likely have never ridden on been on passenger rail like Amtrak, but freight rail is king. That's how you get all the cheap prices, because if we didn't have rail, everything you pay for, from, say, paper cups from Walmart to The local car dealership would quadruple and go even up to tenfold the price. Rail saves the economy. Rail works. Next to rail is shipping, but in this chapter we really don't get much into shipping outside of the Great Lakes. Of course, in the 1970s, manufacturing went kind of downhill, got shipped out overseas. This is a very kind of a quick tour of it. And we were left with suburbs being the place of business, the central business district, which is talked about in your book on page 47. I'm not going to get that far into it. Had disappeared, where everything was diversified, and now we're in the information age, and manufacturing being mostly shipped overseas. We have high-tech centers, and the best high-tech center is Menlo Park, California, which I've been in, and actually worked on some stuff out there for a little while on GIS. And that's where all your high tech, we have some here in Atlanta, next door state in Georgia, Atlanta, high tech parks. You've got Georgia Tech, you got all the industries of computers, with all the basically all the high tech people there, your high tech people up north. So that's one industry. But what happened to manufacturing was it just died. In this, for all extents and purposes. Even like in the South, we had a lot of knitting mills. They went away overseas. So we have scattered industries like the high tech, like computers, and Menlo Park is just an example of one I wanted to show you. Now, remember the Great Recession beginning in 2008, where the savings and loan debacle just decimated the housing industry. And so what we had was neighborhoods like the Pittsburgh Community Improvement Association in South Atlanta, the Pittsburgh community, which was a neighborhood of Southern Railway workers, built in the 20s, houses, beautiful homes that top of the line, old growth wood, were for the African American railroad workers. And have been there since. Now, what happened to these homes was developers started moving in. Remember that ugly word, gentrification, the expression of class inequality, as Loretta Lees once said. I read that definition to you. Well, the people that own these homes, the elderly people, couldn't afford the higher taxes, and that started moving them out. And that's what the developers wanted. And the movement, the Pittsburgh Community Improvement Association, that's them here. In fact, I recognize some of these faces. I worked with there 2 years doing my thesis, put a stop to that and kept the elderly in their own homes through that horrible time. And homes like these were moving in, and that's gentrification right there, where they would take these homes, renovate them, turn around and sell them at a high rate to people, to $300,000 or $400,000 that would cost $300,000 or $400,000, and kind of now the neighborhood's come up. Yes, it has, but Pittsburgh's unusual because now the residents stay there. So gentrification really didn't hit them that hard in that neighborhood. There's a Pittsburgh Community Improvement Association meeting. Anyway, in fact, they use one of my maps, and it's actually on this web that I made. So anyway, what it is, and this is one quote I want you to look at in your book on page 49. It has, in the United States today, it's under changing geographies of economic opportunity. And boy, does that mean, that's it all in a nutshell. In the United States today, the number of families living in middle-income neighborhoods is more than 1/3 less than it was in the 1970s. During that same half-century, residential area housing, the wealthy and the poor have doubled in size. Wow. So the middle-class dream is fading. The wealthy got richer and the poor got poorer. So that's a big problem. That's touching on third world. And I'll stop with this video and we'll finish up with the last video on this chapter, but just wanted to, and it's a long one, wanted to kind of bring you into the realm of economic reality.